So statistics for Kentucky 2014. These statistics were compiled in 2013. I'm gonna say a couple statistics so that way it's not totally. I'm making the video in 2014. So the uh, recently we have a tale of two Kentucky schools. You had CARA 1990. You had a revolution in education that happened in Kentucky. We also adopted the standards quicker than anybody else. But 1990, you had the Kentucky Education Reform Act, and it brought about many changes to Kentucky's education system. Essentially, it started out with a lawsuit about equitable funding, and it brought back or brought about the SEEK formula. So the SEEK formula says that every student in Kentucky gets paid, they get, the school itself gets paid for every student that they have equally, no matter if you're in a rich district or a poor district. There was also the SBDMs, the site-based decision-making councils were created, which is where parents could get involved, so it was democratic. They made it more decentralized. And they also added technology and computers into the classroom. So the tale to Kentucky schools, Barberville gets $8,362 per student. Anchorage gets $19,927. And even while there's a huge disparity between Anchorage and Barberville, $8,000. So if you was to consider some of Senator Rand Paul's ideas, then essentially what would happen is every parent would get $8,000 every year to be able to put their kid in whatever school they want to put their kid into. By having a voucher, you can choose the best schools, and then the competition in the marketplace will be able to, raise the good ones and then lower the bad ones. That's his idea. Whether you agree with that or not, it's still, $8,000. What would you do with $8,000 for your own kid? If you're Barberville, you could put your kid through a private school, $8,000. So you could choose to go to a private school. You could, put faith in the public education, which I'm not sure if you should really. It depends on the methods and the strategies and the type and the vision and the philosophy of the school. So I don't. It doesn't matter if it's public or private. To me, it matters what kind of education is actually being taught. So John Cleves, he writes this January 4th, 2014. So 4 days into the new year, 2014, a tale to Kentucky schools. Barberville's getting $8,000, 8,362, so $8,000. Anchorage is getting 19,927, so they're getting 20,000. One school's getting 8,000, another school in Kentucky is getting 20,000 per student, and that's how they get paid. Okay, so it doesn't actually matter if they're educating or if they're giving us the skills that we need to survive. How public schools get paid is by the students sitting their butts in the chairs. Once they go to school, for every student they get so much money per student. So it doesn't matter if they're actually educating anybody, they just want to get as many people into their schools so they can get that money. So a good protest for students against the teachers is a boycott, is a walkout. You're not gonna get paid. Everybody's gonna not come to school. Nobody will get any money. The students don't need the teachers need the students, and the teachers need the students so the whole school can get paid, and then they get paid. Not to mention they're public servants, so they're our servants. They're supposed to do what we want them to do. So John Cleves, the Herald Leader, January 4th, 2014. He's talking about the huge disparity. One's getting $20,000, one's getting $8,000. So the SEEK formula isn't working. Equitable distribution isn't working. CARA, which was passed in 1990 as a revolution in Kentucky education, it is not being followed because Anchorage is getting twice as much as Barberville. So there are poorer schools who's getting left behind. No Child Left Behind. You're getting a whole, this is an Appalachia village. This is a old, this is like back in loincloths, right? And and chucking spears at wild, Serengeti animals. So this is Barberville. This is Appalachia. This is a poor school. The whole fucking town is getting left behind. Every poor person is being, forgotten about. So they're not getting a head start. They're not being equitably distributed. It definitely shows favoritism. It shows nepotism. It also shows if you're in a rich district, your school will be taken care of, whereas you may not. Public schools in this Appalachian town pocked with shuttered factories and vacant storefronts got an average of $8,362 to spend on each student's education. In 2013, at least, they had gotten in 5 years. Several hours away at the public K-8 school in the wealthy Jefferson County suburb of Anchorage, revenues rose slightly to $19,927 per student, more than twice as much as Barbourville's. Everything looks better in Anchorage. Teachers' salaries and experience levels, class sizes, textbooks, computer access, test scores, and the future in general. After 8th grade, Anchorage students can go to a number of fine private academies, or if their parents desire, they can bypass Louisville, sometimes troubled urban classrooms for public high school in affluent Oldham County, 10 miles down the road. So Anchorage has a choice between going to, there's competition there for Anchorage. And so there's competition keeps dollars rolling in their public schools. The model we have here is really working, said Anchorage School Superintendent Kelly Ransdell. In Barbourville, locals are proud of their independent city schools, they call it, a small campus enrolling about 700, mostly poor people from preschool to 12th, 8th grade. But they don't fool themselves about where it ranks. There's no money for pay raises and little for arts programs unless parents raise it themselves. There are a handful of desktop computers outdated in the iPad era. So iPads come in, so as PCs are outdated. There's no state aid for textbooks, so the books on hand are few, old and worn. When new books become essential last year to teach modern division math at the elementary school, officials lifted $19,276 from the building repair fund. And the buildings needed repair. Unable to afford expansion of the tiny cafeteria, the district staggers lunchtime throughout the day, sending in the youngest kids at 10:30 a.m., the oldest at 1 p.m. Everyone has 20 minutes to be served, eat and get out. Morale at the school is low, said Ann Penderson, who is mother of 3 Barbourville students and treasurer for the district's parent-teacher organization. We have some great teachers, but it's been very, very difficult for us to try and keep up. The kids notice among the problems facing Kentucky lawmakers in the 2014 General Assembly starting Tuesday is a growing inequality between public schools like those in Anchorage and Barbourville that is not supposed to exist. 6 years of state budget cuts have hobbled districts that depend heavily on outside assistance. Democratic Governor Steve Beshear promises to restore as much money as he can when he proposes the next 2-year state budget this month, even if it means further cuts to other parts of state government. On Friday, House Speaker Greg Stumbo, D. Prestonsburg, floated the idea of asking voters to approve a 1-cent increase in the state sales tax to generate about $500 million a year for Educational Excellence Trust Fund. However, not all lawmakers share this concern about unequal school funding. Senate President Robert Stivers, whose district includes Barbourville, says he believes the town has an appropriate and adequately performing school. So he's trying to cover it up, say, oh, yeah, it's not equitably funded, but it's a good school. So Robert Stivers, he's an asshole. He don't give a shit about Barbourville. He's the Senate president, so he's got a lot of flack. He's got a lot of pull. He should be able to bring more tax dollars back home, but evidently, I guess being the opposition and being an obstructionist, following in the tracks in the wake of the David Williams and Richie Farmer scandals, it's, and plus all the sexual harassment that is going on in Frankfort. He says, Stivers, I've got no complaints in my time about the academic careers or studies at Barbourville Independent. You want to do everything you can for restoring funding, but then again, you just throw money at it doesn't mean it's going to be successful. Oh, yeah, so Barbourville, you're going to get fucked by your own representative, fucking Stivers. He comes out of Manchester, so big surprise. Clay County, Owsley County, many of these counties have extraordinarily, some of the poorest in the entire, America, some of the poorest counties in all of America. Anchorage, the population's 2,000 people, and in Barbourville it's 3,000 people, so there's actually more people in Barbourville. 1% did not graduate high school in Anchorage, whereas 33% in Barbourville is not graduate, so that's 1 out of every 3 fucking people in Knox County are not graduating. Do you think the judge executive is going to give a shit? You think the fucking political establishment, the white supremacist power structure is going to give a shit? They haven't, since 1774. Don't see why they would care about the poor now. So 74% of adults who have at least a 4-year college degree, 18% in Barbourville, so about 3/4 have at least college in Anchorage, whereas only 1 out of 5 have college in Barbourville. So this is a wealthy, elite city school versus a poor, forgotten Appalachia poor town. And so you see the quality. You can't just throw money at the problem, but you see the districts that have money doing is superior, like way better than Barbourville. They're not even close to doing anything good. Like Barbourville's so far behind, the digital gap is just going to get bigger and bigger for those who have computers versus those who don't have computers. 1990 CARE didn't seem to have worked nor been implemented in Knox County, so they did not see the revolution. The revolution hasn't happened in Barbourville. It was a bunch of ideas that Frankfurt came up with, but Barbourville's going to do their own fucking thing. In fact, very much opposing the CARE. You have your own Stivers who's working, against the interest of Barbourville, which is actually not a big surprise. 80% of Clay County elects Republicans, and they're the poorest county in all of America. And then you have Stivers, Robert Stivers, who's actively fighting against Barbourville from getting any funding. He doesn't give a shit. He says it's good enough. Who gives a shit if the teachers are getting paid? Who cares if we got quality teachers? Who cares? Who gives a shit? So 1990 CARA, Kentucky Education Reform Act, required the state to equalize funding between poor school districts which cannot raise enough money from meager local tax bases, and districts like Anchorage and Lexington that are blessed with high incomes and home values. Under CARA, the state was supposed to pour money into the half-empty budgets of poor districts until they rose to a level that was more or less even with everyone else. You want a child in any middle school math class to have access to the same learning resources that are available to every other child in every other class in the state, whether they're in Barbourville or Anchorage, said Brad Hughes, spokesman for the Kentucky School Boards Association. For a while, CARA almost succeeded in this goal. The Kentucky Department of Education redistributed billions of dollars to poor districts. This never closed the funding gap. A child always was luckier to be born in a rich community, but during the early 2000s, the gap narrowed. According to state budget data, by 2004, per pupil revenue in Barbourville stood as high as 62% of Anchorage's. Then came the economic recession of 2008, followed by rounds of state budget cuts. Kentucky froze its $2.9 billion a year SEEK program, the state's primary funding source for schools. That was tantamount to a reduction as enrollment and costs such as fuel and health insurance kept rising. The state axed most everything else, including its assistance for textbook purchases, teacher training, and technology upgrades. Inflicting more pain, Congress is cutting federal education spending. Last year's initial round of sequestration under the American Taxpayer Relief Act eliminated tens of millions of dollars meant for Kentucky schools, often the poorest, such as an estimated $11.2 million in Title I grants meant to strengthen schools with high poverty populations. Schools like Barbourville's. Anchorage hardly qualifies for much state or federal aid, so it barely felt the cuts. Anchorage's median home value is $630,000. Most adult residents are well-paid professionals, and it taxes itself aggressively to pay for its school. Teacher pay raises have continued, as have textbook purchases. Students and teachers interact in class through laptop computers, and those classes are among the smallest in the state, which is a terrific boon, school officials say. If you have 30 to 35 kids in a room during any kinds of hands-on activity, it can be difficult, but if you have 20 kids in a room, then it's obviously easier, said Ransdale, the Anchorage school superintendent. By contrast, Kentucky's poor school districts fell behind again, laying off, start, and closing programs. In 2012, the Kentucky Office of Education Accountability was warning lawmakers, while the magnitude of the equity gap varies depending on the method used, all methods consistently show that the equity gap has been widening in recent years. Next year, in terms of per pupil revenue, Barbourville schools got just 42% of the money enjoyed by Anchorage and 67% of the state wide average of $11,058. In Barberville, nearly 1 in 3 people are poor, many draw on public assistance. So you have Barberville, most people there are on welfare. They're, they're getting public education, so they're getting, food stamps, they're getting WIC, they're getting all these LIHEAP, they're getting all these federal assistance programs. And when they get cut, because you have Republicans such as Rand Paul, and, other people, Robert Stivers, who are against taxes, they're going to screw your kids over.